So looking at our chapter, or not, well, I didn't really call it that, but it's our Solving Quadratics quiz review. So the first section you're going to see on your quiz tomorrow is state the solutions of the given parabola or the quadratics you're given. So remember, your solutions are where your graph touches or crosses the x-axis. So if you look on this graph, it just touches or crosses, well, it doesn't really cross, it just touches at x equals 3. For the second graph, you would put that it crosses at -2, and it also crosses at 4. So depending on your graph, you could have one solution, you could have two. I guess it's even possible to have no solutions if your graph looked something like this, like it just didn't cross the x-axis. You could say that there's no solution, so just be careful. But honestly, this section should be one of the easier ones tomorrow because, I mean, there's not a lot to it. I mean, as long as you're just being careful, not making like a silly mistake, but this shouldn't be the section that gives us a lot of issues. So that's what section 1 will look like. And keep in mind, one thing I'm considering, I haven't made the quiz yet. I'll be making it this weekend, obviously, but I can promise you that it won't be any longer than your review. It might even be shorter. I might cut some questions out, like the number of questions I asked. So just kind of keep that in mind. For section 2, we're going to solve using the zero product property. So I know it's been a little bit since we've done these, but basically to solve, this is called, it's in factored form right now. You're going to take each one of your binomials or your pieces and just set these equal to 0 and solve. So I mean, like this first one, you just subtract the 3. I mean, you're just going to get -3. For the second one, you're going to add the 2 over first. So that would equal +2. Divide by 2, you'll get x equals 1. So really not too bad. I mean, usually when you set these up too, they're going to be pretty basic in terms of the equation. Let me just clean this up. That's a equal sign. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to try number 2. The one thing I want to say, before you try number 2, when you split this apart, you're just going to have x equals 0, and you're going to have x minus 3 equal to 0. So for this first part, like you're done. So I don't think we've seen problems like that. But basically, if you have an x in front, it's just going to be x equals 0. But I'm going to give you guys a second to see if you can, well, I might just go through it because honestly, I mean, for this one, you would literally just add 3. You would get x equals 3. But maybe on some of these other sections, we'll let you try some of them. So section 3, also solving, if you notice, pretty much all of these sections, we're always talking about solving these, but I'm going to solve a quadratic using a factor tree. So if you remember, you put your c up top. So we want it to multiply to our c value. Because our a value is 1, you're not going to have to do any grouping on your quiz or on this review. Because honestly, if you have to do grouping, sometimes it's just easier to do quadratic formula, depending on your opinion. Our b value goes on the bottom, and we want it to add up to this. So we want to think of two numbers that multiply to 6, add up to 5. Anyone see it? 3 and 2. This one's, I mean, the numbers are pretty small, so not a bad one. You shouldn't have to try too much. So 3 and 2 or 2 and 3 work. So you're just going to rewrite this. So you're going to have x plus 3 because it's a +3, and you're going to have x plus 2 because it's a +2. You can have this order reversed, for example. But then now this is just like a problem from section 2. You're going to take each one of these groups, set it equal to 0, and then you're going to solve. So like you would just subtract the 3 in this first one. So that would be -3. For the second one, you're going to subtract the 2. So you're going to get -2. And that's it for that one. So I'm going to let you guys try number 4. See if you can do that one because it's been a bit since we've done these factor trees. But basically, and for the video, since I paused after watching this, since this is a -8 for your c value, that's why it's a -8 up top. Then on the bottom, we have a 2 because that's our b value. So we're trying to think of something that multiplies to -8 and adds up to +2. So most people, I mean, the pair you might start with is 2 and 4 or 4 and 2, but you got to figure out which one of those numbers is going to be negative. Is it going to be the 4 or the 2? And you should see that it is the 2 because 4 plus -2 would be +2. If you had it the other way around, you would get -2. And one tip, if you want your two numbers to add up to a positive, the bigger of the two needs to be positive. But worst case, I mean, just plug in your calculator, just make sure it works. Now that we've got our factors, it's going to be x minus 2 because it's -2 and x plus 4. And like I said, the order doesn't matter. So if you have this like flipped around, no big deal. But then we're just going to set these factors equal to 0. So you would add the 2, you'd get +2. And this one, you would subtract the 4, you would get -4. And then you're done. And one kind of tip, I mean, like you might have noticed a lot of these problems, if it's just like x plus a number or x minus a number, basically your answer is just a sign flip. So if you're able to like go straight to your answer from the factors, feel free to use some shortcuts if you're seeing them. The only thing you do need to be real careful about is like if you have like a binomial like this, you really do need to solve it out unless you can do that mentally. So that's usually why I'm always showing my work, because sometimes if you're not careful, it can lead to problems. But so some of you guys probably are getting pretty comfortable. You can probably see the answers before you even write this out. So feel free to skip some steps if you can. Section 4, though, is going to be about quadratic formula. If you notice on the review, I give you the formula. I will put the formula on your test as well. It's not something I expect you to memorize or anything, but you might be in a class where you do need to kind of know it by heart. But I bet a lot of you guys, after doing it so much too, if we spent some more time or did some more problems, you probably already kind of knew it, or like you could somewhat recall what it was off the top of your head. But the first thing you want to do is list your A, your B, and your C. So in this problem, our A is 2, our B is 5, and our C is 3, and they're all positives because there's pluses. There's no like minuses or anything like that. So this is our formula. Like I said, I would recommend, I added this myself, but I put parentheses, around all my variables, because that's how, if you're putting it in a calculator, that's how you're going to want to put it in. So if we just plug in what we have into this formula, we're going to have negative parentheses 5 plus or minus, the bottom, it's 2 times A, so 2 parentheses 2, big square root, parentheses B squared, so 5 squared, minus 4, parentheses 2, because our A, and then parentheses 3, because that's our C. And then we just want to start cleaning this up. So this first part is just going to be -5. The bottom's going to be 4. And then we want to simplify this radical. So if you have a calculator, you can just plug it into there. You can also use desmos.com if you're like at home and don't have a calculator that can like easier. Because if you try and put this in your phone, a lot of times it's easy to mess up. But take a second, see if you can plug this in. Let me know what you get for your square root part. So if you put that in your calculator, you should get that it's 1 underneath your square root. And a lot of times if it's simple, before I split up my fraction, what is the square root of 1? Well, the square root of 1 is 1, or if you put that in your calculator, it equals 1. So if it works out to be a nice number, usually I just get rid of my square root, just because it's going to be easier to just plug in 1 than the square root of 1. But then we're going to have -5 minus 1 over 4. And then we just want to simplify these fractions. Just be careful when you're putting these, like if you're working these out in a calculator, do the top. So like for the first one, -5 plus 1, press equals. That's -4 divided by 4. You should get that this first fraction equals -1. And then the second fraction, -5 minus 1, that's -6 divided by 4. You're going to get -1.5. And don't be alarmed. Like I said, I haven't made your quiz yet, but it's very possible when you do a question on your quiz with quadratic formula, you might get a decimal. So don't like be worried too much if you get a decimal when you do quadratic formula, because usually if you're doing quadratic formula, it's because the problem can't be solved super, like using one of these other easier methods. So a lot of times it is going to work out to be answers that aren't super nice. Moving on to our next section, this is what we just did earlier this week with solving using the square root method. And honestly, the problems you're going to see on your quiz, I mean, I think they're easier than some of the ones you saw in Delta Math. I mean, you might agree or disagree with me there, but there's probably less steps to isolate them. But for this first problem, you want to get the x squared by itself. So I mean, you're just going to add that 3 over. And when you've got x squared equals a number, how do we get rid of the square? What are we going to do to both sides? I'm not going to divide it. But remember, to get rid of a power, you square root both sides.
Yeah, okay.
So that cancels out. So you just get x equals. You don't know, you can put it in your calculator, but the square root of 4 is 2. But don't forget to put a plus or minus with your answer, because really 2 times 2 is 4 and negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. So there's actually 2 answers. But that's one thing you kind of want to be careful if you're ever in a future math class. Anytime you square a number, anytime you square root a number, you got to put plus or minus. Okay. Number 7, we want to get the part that's up to the second power by itself. So you might be tempted in number 7 to distribute, but you can't distribute because there's the power of 2. Exactly. So to get rid of that 2, that's really 2 times that. So you can divide it to both sides. So if you do that, the left side, you'll just have x minus 1 up to the second power. Half of 32, or 32 divided by 2 would be 16. So now I know there's extra stuff, but we have something up to the second power equals 16. So you can just square root this whole side and square root the 16. That's going to get rid of the power of 2. So you're just going to bring down the x minus 1. You can get rid of the parentheses now too. And the square root of 16 is 4. And that would be plus or minus 4. But like I said, if you don't know, like I know some of you guys, like if I ask you what's the square root of 16, you can just tell me. But if not, just put it in your calculator if you need to. But now we need to solve this. But since this is a plus and a negative 4, we're going to split this into 2 separate equations. We're going to get 2 answers. So we're going to do x minus 1 equals positive 4 and x minus 1 equals negative 4. And then just solve these and we are done. So add 1. 4 plus 1 is 5. Add 1. Negative 4 plus 1. Be careful. Remember, like a negative, it's like you owe someone $4. You pay them $1 back. You still owe them $3. So it'd be negative 3. You can also kind of think of a number line. If you're at negative 4, you go 1 to the right. You'd be at negative 3. But if you're ever having trouble doing negatives, I mean, either just put it in the calculator, but that might help you if you don't have a calculator. Okay. And then the last section you're going to see on your quiz, I'm going to give you some kind of question where I give you like a work sample or someone is doing something with the quadratic formula. And I'm going to ask, can you figure out where maybe they went wrong? Some common mistakes. So for this problem, it says, identify the 2 mistakes made in setting up the quadratic formula. Explain in words what the mistake was or how to fix it. So the first thing I'm just going to kind of put it down here on the side, but I'm going to put what the quadratic formula is, like the actual formula. So maybe that'll help us see maybe where the mistakes are. So when you get to a question like this on your quiz, the first thing you might want to do is just list what your A, B, and C should have been. What would our B and what would our C have been in this problem? Because remember that there's really like a 1 in front of that x, so that's going to be negative 1 because it's minus 1 and negative 6. So just be careful with the signs, because honestly, if there's a mistake with quadratic formula, a lot of times it's just a sign issue. So they said there's 2 mistakes in this quadratic formula. Does anyone see any of their mistakes? Okay, so that's the first one, and that's, in my opinion, I think this one's the easier one to spot, but like that one right there, right? So I'm going to call that, I'm just going to say that's, I'll color code it, but the first mistake, the 6 should be -6. And when you're taking your quiz, I'll have to think about this. I might change this. I might even make it like a multiple choice question because it's kind of hard maybe to do at home if you don't have a paper copy. But I want, if it's like this, I would like you to circle the mistake and then explain in words what it is, like what it should have been. Okay, let's see if we can find the second mistake. Do you see anything else, Jasmine? By chance or not? Nah? Oh, JLS, sorry. I'm so bad with that. I'm so sorry. Sorry. Or anyone in the Zoom chat? But so far, no one said anything in the Zoom chat, so I don't know who we've got with us. So the second mistake pointed out by Jayla is this -1 here. If you remember, the formula is negative parentheses b, so it should have been -1. So they could have written it like this, or I mean, -1 would have been a +1. So I'm just going to say that -1 should have been a +1, or you could write it like the negative parentheses -1. Like either way is fine, but they're missing that extra negative. They didn't use that. They just put b there instead of -b there, if that makes sense. So 2 mistakes. So I'm going to put some kind of question like this. I mean, maybe I'll just find one where there's 1 mistake instead of 2, or maybe something similar to this, but just these are the things to look out. Usually it's, I mean, honestly, I mean, unless they just put the wrong number in the wrong spot kind of thing, a lot of times it's just being careful with our signs. So this is our review. I will be posting out like a filled copy as well on Google Classroom. So let me stop this video.